Hello, I'm Juliet Mann, and this is the Agenda podcast, CGTN Europe's one-stop shop for smart, in-depth discussion of the issues that really matter in the world today. The results of Germany's snap election are in, and Friedrich Merz is set to be the country's next leader after his Christian Democratic Union took 28% of the vote. But with the far-right AfD taking a strong second place, Europe's largest economy faltering, and rows between the EU and the US growing, how big a task is Merz really facing? With me now are Heiner Flassbeck, honorary professor for economics and politics at Hamburg University and former state secretary in the German Federal Ministry of Finance, Eberhard Sandschneider, director of the Research Institute of the German Society for Foreign Policy, and Ariadna Ripoll, Servent, professor of politics at the University of Salzburg. Heiner, it's been a huge week for Germany. Merz is in, Scholz is out. Why do you think that this German election has been such a dramatic moment for Germany in particular?
Germany is in a very bad economic situation. The Conservatives, the Christian Union with Merz, have promised to turn the economy around, but they're searching for a coalition partner, which is an old partner, is the Social Democrats. And unfortunately, I do not see how this coalition can really change things in the right direction. Well, just to be conservative is not enough in this world. You have to have a plan. And I think the plan of Merz and including the Social Democrats is not good enough to bring Germany out of the doldrums.
Eberhard, I wonder what you think of the overall result. I mean, we saw huge engagement in this election, voter participation 83%, and the far-right AfD getting those record results. What do you make of it?
Well, the biggest problem, obviously, is that most, if not most people in Germany are not only concerned, they are deeply worried about changes going on both domestically and internationally. We feel less secure given the war of Russia against Ukraine. We feel, to put it mildly, irritated by the first moves of the new old American president, Donald Trump. We know that our economy is in a really difficult situation. So taking all that together, the complexity of the world we are living in is growing, and people are searching for solutions. The only answer we can give is the last 3 years didn't provide that much of a solution. And now the big hope is that the next government, Conservatives and Social Democrats, might be able to get things right. But that is a big question for the future.
And talking of big questions for the future, Ariadna, I mean, it's really interesting when you look at the map, the votes map of Germany. There's almost a complete split between East and West, with that surge rightwards really being seen in much of East Germany. What are the implications here, Ariadna?
I think that it's really kind of a question of thinking about, where the problem is coming from and what can be done. And that there are, of course, some kind of differences that are still there in terms of like the past, of course, kind of how political parties did not really emerge in the East. They are still voting mostly for West German parties. And so there is an issue of like political culture there. But of course, there are also economic issues. Whether they are really kind of real economic issues or perceived economic issues, that is, of course, another question. And there is, of course, a question that the East lost a lot of people who emigrated to the West, and that, of course, is also creating this split. But there has to be some sort of response to this, and one of them could also be maybe concentrating more on talking about the economy and how to solve these economic gaps, whether they are real or perceived, rather than concentrating maybe on issues such as migration, which, especially for the East, are not really an issue.
Oh, Heiner, we've heard there's some of those big issues: migration, security, the stagnating, spluttering economy. Friedrich Merz, as we've been discussing, is inheriting an economy in recession with crisis in the automotive sector dragging things down. And while he's pledged to cut red tape and reduce these high costs for businesses and for consumers, he hasn't given much detail. I know you're not that positive about it from what you've said so far, but can Merz fix the economy?
No. Well, maybe changing his mind totally, that's possible, then he can. But at this very moment, with his prejudices about the economy, no. There's no chance, because what happened in Germany, to be very brief, give a brief diagnosis of the situation, where we have restrictive monetary policies all over Europe. What does monetary policy do? It's restricting investment. Who's suffering most? Well, the biggest country that produces investment goods. So that's very simple. That's the main reason. There are many other things that do not go well, but that you cannot cure with the red tape, with reducing red tape or bureaucracy, and I don't know what. This is ridiculous in my view. What you need is really a big push. You have to do the same thing that the United States do, namely counter the restrictive monetary policy by extremely expansionary fiscal policy, but that is forbidden in Europe. That is the European problem. It's not only a German problem, but it's a European problem. In Germany, they even have put in the constitution that the government should not do that. The government should not do, due to German constitution and the European debt rules, the government should not do what is absolutely unavoidable in such a kind of situation. So the result, you see, the result is disaster, economic disaster, stagnation in Germany, recession and stagnation for more than 2 years. And look to our neighbor in France, exactly the same thing. Look at Italy. They all need the push, and the push can only come from the government. That is due to the circumstances. And so all the talk about competitiveness and I don't know what is all useless, all micro. We need a macro approach, but nobody in this government, including the Social Democrats, has such an approach.
And in terms of a changing approach, here's Eberhard. I mean, the previous government's economic policy was very much geared towards sustainability, climate protection, the green transition. Scholz was committed to ideally phasing out coal by 2030. Now, Merz has vowed to restore Germany's industrial competitiveness. Do you think that climate policy is now going to slip down the agenda? I mean, after all, the Green Party, once that stalwart of German politics, didn't do that well this time around, did they?
Perhaps still too early to tell, because we don't know yet how the Social Democrats will reposition themselves in this new grand coalition. They have been part of the problem in the last government, one part of a three-party problem, and now they have to redefine and reinvent themselves, doing that as a loser of the last election and in cooperation with the Conservative Party. That's a big challenge, including the fact that major personal changes are going on while we are speaking in the Social Democratic Party. So it is too early to tell whether they will really be able to come together, to find new ideas, to agree on major steps ahead. The last government basically ruined the whole show by being over-prescriptive, by trying to tell people how they want people to live, and people don't buy that. And this has to be changed. And the de-ideologization of German, both economic policy, but basically any policy, is the major challenge and the major task for the next government. For the moment, it is conceivable, as Mr. Flassbeck just said, that we are a little bit skeptical and don't have too much hope that things will change radically and within just a few weeks or months. But that's an open question, and much depends on the future of the Social Democratic Party and the direction this party is taking.
Ariadna, let's pick on something that you flagged earlier, that big issue of migration and the success of the AfD. I mean, what do you think it says about Germany and where the country might be headed in the future? I mean, is this part of the rise of the right that we're seeing across the continent, across much of Europe, or a temporary blip?
I think it really, we need to position it in a broader framework of what is happening in Europe, right? So we see that most of the center-right conservative parties, even some social democratic parties have tended to, and even some liberal parties like the FDP have now tended to copy the message about restrictive migration policies that radical right parties, populist parties, have been putting on kind of to the front, and this is, on the one hand, kind of leading migration policies to a very specific, in a very specific direction, where we basically have a lot of emphasis on the external dimension, external solutions, closing borders. But this is, of course, also kind of affecting internal policies in the sense of kind of putting into question all the Schengen project, the free movement of people also inside the EU borders. And so in a way, all these center-right parties especially have really been parroting, copying the message of the radical right populist parties, even though we know that this does not help. And I think that that the example of Merz is here kind of very good, that to kind of play into the hands of the AfD has not really helped him win more votes or stop the rise of the AfD.
Heiner, would you agree with that assessment? What's your take on the AfD?
Yeah, well, I would just want to come in on competitiveness. You see, the point is everybody's talking in Europe, Draghi report or so, everybody's talking about competitiveness. But you see, take Germany. Germany is extremely competitive. It has still a current account surplus of 250 billion. What else do you want? This current account surplus is threatened by Trump's policy really, really badly and in the near future. So, but nevertheless, people continue to talk about competitiveness. That's not the point. As my colleague said before, he's absolutely right. The former government was engaged in a lot of things. They were supporting single companies. They were supporting the relocation of investment, and I don't know what, and climate change, 1,000 measures on climate change. First of all, we have to fix our economy, and fixing the German economy means fixing the European economy. And this cannot be done, and this has to be done immediately, but it cannot be done by, as my colleague said, by closing German borders. This is the most stupid idea that you can have. As the Christian Democrats and Merz, they had already an initiative to get a majority in the parliament to close all German borders, to put a wall around Germany, I don't know what, which is destroying Europe, which is destroying the European economic relations, which is destroying trade in Europe. And if we do that, in addition to the threat for trade that comes from the United States, then we will be lost. It will be a plain disaster. So what we need is a unification of Europe, more opening inside Europe, finding a solution to the migration problem. It's a difficult problem, but there are proposals on the table. So first go for these proposals, put them into national right, and then continue. But I fear very much Mr. Merz is sometimes rather choleric, that he tends to do, I don't know, overnight fixings that will produce a huge damage.
Yeah. Ariadna, let's talk more about the impact of what happens in Germany for the rest of Europe and indeed the rest of the world. I mean, Friedrich Merz talked about this new era of systemic conflict and said that Germany should realign its priorities. What do you take from that?
I think that he was mostly talking about defense and trade, probably. And there probably we will see a change, or there is a chance for a change in that direction. But the problem is, of course, that everything that he does depends as well on his coalition partners inside of Germany, right? And we have seen in the past that this has been one issue for Germany to speak with one single voice when it comes to trying to convince their partners in the European Union. And so that can stay a bit the same problem, that if there continue to be conflicts, for instance, on how should Germany intervene in Ukraine, or how should Germany help Ukraine and to what extent, and so on and so forth. And it's going to be very difficult to then act as a leading force also when it comes to issues of defense at the European level.
Heiner, what do you think Merz as Chancellor is going to mean for Germany's international role? I mean, if we look at before the election, the polls results, before they were even in, he declared that the US was indifferent to Europe's fate. He questioned the future of NATO and demanded Europe boost its own defences. How do you see all that playing out?
Well, in my opinion, the big challenge for Germany, as for any German leader, is to reunite Europe. We're really not a united Europe anymore. We have a lot of tensions, beginning with the German current account surplus for 20 years now. It is preventing other countries from doing the right economic policies. It is never solved. It's not even talked about. Then we have now the new situation where by a sudden the American president becomes what we call a Putin sympathizer, and so Europe has to find its own role, and that can only go by agreement, by negotiation, by remaining calm and talking to the people, going to Paris first. The first thing you should do, go to Paris and unite with Macron on the most important things, go to Rome and unite the big players so that we have a chance for Europe to improve our market, our common market. It's a huge market. We can live on our own. We do not need the United States. We have to redefine economic policies, as I said in the beginning, with throwing overboard all the orthodox recipes. Then we would have a chance. But I do not see that Merz is this person. He has no relationship so far to Europe. He never mentions Europe. I do not even remember in a speech that Europe played a prominent role in his speeches. Either he learns very quickly, or we're going to be the laggard again in Europe compared to the United States.
It's interesting what you say there about him not really talking about Europe, when this election quite unusually seemed to have such a bit, for a European election, seemed to have such a big focus on foreign policy. Eberhard, I want to bring you in here, and I wonder if you agree, because since Trump's second inauguration, we've seen this sea of change, haven't we, in terms of the relationship between the United States and Europe. And I wonder how you think that Merz is going to deal with that, and if you feel he's got a mandate to stand up to the United States.
Well, first of all, he will be elected German Chancellor, and I would argue that it is expecting a little bit too much from any German government, whether led by Mr. Merz or not, to reunite Europe. That's up also to other European governments. And the fact that everyone is talking about Europe should finally speak with one voice is obviously not part of reality, but not because Europe is not able to do so, but Europe doesn't want to do so. That's the problem. And many other European governments do shy away from a more united Europe. Take Hungary as one example, but it's not the only one. The right shift in many other European countries are moving towards renationalization, also within the European Union. And here comes Trump with a completely new approach to international relations. Call it blackmail or call it deal-making. That's two sides of the same coin, and that is challenging Europe to a point where one might find even a little moment of optimism if Trump continues to push Europe, as he obviously is willing to do. That might help the Europeans to find common ground for a more common approach to policies. But that is the big challenge. Europe is caught between Scylla and Charybdis, as one would have said in ancient Greece, between the United States on the one hand and China and Russia on the other hand, not finding a way out of this dilemma for the time being. But, well, it is correct that Merz didn't talk too much about Europe, but he was focusing on the domestic situation in Germany, on domestic economy, on the migration problem. These were the two major elements of his election campaign. Yeah. And he has to find a core problem, which is not only a German problem. Many people don't understand the world anymore. It's getting too fast, too complex, and they are seeking for solutions. And they are finding these solutions for the time being in simple offers, as they are proposed, especially by right-wing populist parties. The AfD, to some extent, has a, well-sounding analysis, but no problem-solving capacity whatsoever. Yeah. Bridging that gap is the major task for Merz domestically, And he will certainly have to move around in Europe, meet Mr. Macron and other European partners. A German chancellor who is not well integrated into European decision-making is what we have had for the last 3 years. And I think Friedrich Merz is internationally experienced enough to know he will have to change that. He will have to be back on the European stage as well as on the domestic stage.
If you see, you talk about migration, you talk about the economy. Both is European. It's not national. It's not. There's no national solution for that. And if you're not European, you will not do anything. And what we need is, in the past, always you need leaders. You need people who stand up and go for a certain thing. I do not see that Merz is one. But that is what Europe, in the end, what makes Europe, starting with Adenauer and Charles de Gaulle and Schmidt and Mitterrand, I don't know what. But you have to go forward into a certain direction with a sound concept, but it's all not existing. Additionally, we do not have leadership at the top of the European Commission. Madame von der Leyen is a big failure, in my view, the biggest failure of all. And so this makes me very pessimistic concerning the German perspective as well as the European perspective. Yeah. And I'm not optimistic at all that they are going to solve it, but I say this, in my view, is absolutely necessary. Yeah. Without Europe, we will not find a solution for anything.
Ariadna, what about you? How do you think Merz is going to position himself and move around Europe?
So I agree that we need to find European solutions. I mean, that's quite clear. But I think that on the one hand, he has the advantage that he shares the same ideology, the same political lines as many leaders now in Europe, in the sense of now we have a European Council where the heads of states or government sit, where most of them are sharing kind of a similar ideology. And of course, as it was said, Commission President von der Leyen is from the same party, although, of course, we know that they do not get along so well personally. So that, of course, it's going to be also an issue of personalities and how they can work together. But I think that we have to face also the reality that sure, Franco-German partnership is important, but Macron is now in a weak position in France. He's going to be probably out soon, and we do not know who is going to replace him. And that many other political leaders are now much less pro-European than they were maybe 20, 30, 40 years ago. So we are facing a very different political context outside of the European Union, and also a very different political context inside the European Union. So, and that makes this European unity, which is necessary, extremely difficult to find. And as already mentioned, right? So countries like Slovakia, Hungary, and in the past Poland, they've been very problematic in terms of finding consensus on issues like the war in Ukraine, or also on issues of migration, on issues of rule of law and democratic backsliding. So we are facing a much more disunited Europe inside, and that makes it also much more difficult to then fight these issues outside.
Eberhard, we've talked about Europe, we've talked about the United States, but what about Germany's relationship with China? I mean, automakers are, well, they are hugely reliant on the Chinese market. The two countries are very big trading partners. But the previous government lobbied against EU tariffs on Chinese electric vehicles. I wonder what approach you think that Merz is going to take and what that's going to mean for that relationship.
Well, the dependency on German economy on China will continue, whether Merz is chancellor or not. But meanwhile, for the last 2 days, we have seen debates coming up which argue we should also reduce our dependency on the American market, which is at least as strong as on the Chinese market. That's the trap Europe is in. We are, as Heiner Flassbeck said, a big economic market. But I'm not sure whether in this world we can live all by ourselves. We have to find ways of dealing both with the United States and China on a geopolitical and geoeconomic level. That is the challenge for Europe. And as Ariadna just said, Europe is not united enough to stand up to that challenge. That is one problem. It's not a national problem. It's part of the German problem, but it is a European problem. And whatever you expect from Mr. Merz, my question would be, where are the other Europeans? He alone cannot do the job, reunite Europe. But where are the other Europeans? The Brits have left for good. The Hungarians want something completely different. The Slovaks as well. Italy as well. France is weak. So where is the counterpart he would have to work with in Europe? That's one of the challenges. So it's not only Friedrich Merz, it's also the rest of Europe. And China maybe will be one of the big winners of this confrontation. As you see, Donald Trump is very carefully in dealing with China. The Chinese have their ways of counteracting. And in the end, this deal-making approach is much closer to a Chinese understanding of global politics than to a European understanding of global politics. Another one of our challenges.
Heiner, what do you think?
Yeah, well, I just want to come in exactly on that point. But the problem is, dear colleagues, that Europe doesn't have any concept of becoming economically successful. That is the problem for the last 20 years. The only concept we have is competitiveness, and it is reiterated by Draghi and Letta. That's ridiculous. That's not the point. Europe is a continent of its own, and it cannot be successful by improving its competitiveness, and in particular not in the Trump world, and not against the Chinese. The Chinese are anyway competitive, but not a big threat for Europe. So Europe has to find a new economic concept that I put a bit on the table at the beginning of of this interview. So I cannot explain it here in detail, but we need a concept that is similar to the one in the United States. And that means it is absolutely unavoidable that the state, the government take a much bigger role, that they take on much more debt. Unfortunately, it is absolutely unavoidable that they take much more debt, and they push the economy out of this trough and into a new growth phase. If we do not do that, but Merz is not the person who will do it. But if we all together, the Europeans, are not able to come over that, then you can discuss Merz and anyone. It will not lead to anything. But if we would be successful, then I'm sure even the Hungarians would join and all the others would join. If you are successful, the world is totally different from a world like in the last 10 years, in particular in Europe, since 2010, where the economic situation is disastrous. It was disastrous more outside Germany than inside Germany, but it was overall for Europe was a disaster.
Heiner Flassbeck, Eberhard Sandschneider and Ariadna Ripoll, Servent, thank you all very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. You're welcome.
Welcome.
Remember, you can subscribe to this podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. You can also find more agenda content on CGTN Europe's Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, Telegram and YouTube channels. Until next time, goodbye.
The most interesting questions.
Are there other living beings beyond Earth?
Will man or machine be in charge?
Great question.
Always have more than one answer.
Well, hold on, let me just draw up a list.
And always come from more than one person.
That's where the credibility lies.
The concept of having a machinery which is alive and evolving didn't wait for us.
The end of inequality of incomes and wealth around the world, can you imagine how difficult that is at the moment to achieve?
Every episode, Stephen Cole, Murray Beveridge, and some of the brightest minds out there shed light on the answers to some of the most intriguing questions.
There are two ways of looking at this.
Machines can't really discriminate between civilian and military targets.
The Answers Project.
Maybe we need to just look at this in a bit more detail.
Extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence.
The Answers Project, a new podcast from CGTN Europe.